first of all, companies need to measure their carbon footprint. They need to understand the sources of emissions and identify emission hotspots. Once companies understand where the emissions are coming from, they can set emissions reduction targets.
Speaking of sustainability, a podcast where we talk to frontrunners, innovators, and business specialists on, well, sustainability and where they think their industries are headed, and more importantly, how they can make them more sustainable. Hi there, I'm Hani Larma from Ecochain, and in today's conversation, I'm speaking to Alessandra from one of our partners, ClimateSeed. They do carbon offsetting the right way. Yes, there is a right way to do carbon offsetting. Check out the conversation. Hi, Alessandra. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Hello, Hani. Nice to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice. One of the things that I think we could start with is maybe if you could give a short introduction about yourself and also your work at ClimateSeed.
Yes, definitely. So I'm Alessandra Souroujon. I've been working at ClimateSeed for the past 3 years, really in different roles of the company, but most recently on with the relationship with the project developers.
Okay.
So yeah, working very closely with the different project developers that we have at ClimateSeed.
Nice. And could you explain really quickly for people who are not maybe familiar with ClimateSeed yet, what is ClimateSeed and what do you exactly do?
Yes, definitely. So, ClimateSeed was launched really to bring transparency to the voluntary carbon market. It was about 3 years and a half ago, and it was launched initially by BNP Paribas. We were a social business, and today we have been recently acquired by AXA IM as part of an impact fund.
Mhm.
And really, the goal of ClimateSeed is to maximize positive impacts to the project and to the local communities. So that's, I think, really our mission at ClimateSeed. And what we do is that we work with different project developers all over the world, and we try to source high quality projects, emission reduction projects.
Yeah, so you're working in, I think, what is quite commonly talked about as carbon offsetting, if I'm correct.
Yes, exactly. So it's known today as carbon offsetting, even though we like to talk more about the climate contribution side of it.
Right.
That we can talk a bit more later. But yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, so I think we can kind of just jump into that already, actually. Like, how would you describe carbon offsetting, and is that actually the correct term that we should be using?
Yes. So carbon offsetting means compensating for residual emissions.
Hmm.
So residual emissions are the emissions remaining after reductions efforts have put in place. And basically, to compensate for 1 ton of CO2 emitted, you can purchase one carbon credit in the voluntary carbon market.
Hmm.
So, a carbon credit is generated from an emission reduction project that either captures or avoids CO2
Right.
emissions. So, these projects are certified by an international or national standard. And once they are verified by an independent auditor, they issue carbon credits that can be sold in the market.
Right.
And so, for example, some projects include on one end, you have the nature-based solution projects, which are very popular. So it's forest conservation, afforestation, reforestation, peatland conservation, mangrove restoration. And on another end, you have other project typologies as well. So there, for example, the cook stove projects, household devices, renewable energies. So those are the different kind of projects that we have today at ClimateSeed.
Right. So, and is carbon offsetting the kind of correct term to be using in terms of this impact reduction projects, or is that something that is kind of changed throughout the years within its use in the media? Because you kind of just hear carbon offsetting related to so many things that I find it, for a lot of people, it's kind of confusing in the end. Like, what is it actually? And is it a term that, can be used for all of these projects? Or is this something very specific?
The terminology has changed a lot.
Right.
So actually at ClimateSeed, we really follow the net zero initiative.
Right.
There's kind of a negative connotation
Hmm.
as compensating for something negative that I did,
Yeah.
and really focusing on the positive side. So actually contributing to projects that generate positive impacts to the environment, to the local communities. So really focusing on those positive aspects, and so talking more about climate contributions.
Yeah, right. So kind of adding even more positive aspects than just compensating for the bad things that we're currently doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and one very important point about these projects is, of course, you have the carbon benefit, right? So they're either capturing or avoiding CO2, but you other have a lot of other co-benefits. So it's actually really impacting local communities, impacting local biodiversity. So those co-benefits, which are actually related to the different sustainable development goals, are also a huge benefit of these types of projects.
Right. What type of benefits are you talking about specifically? Do you have any examples of that?
Yes, definitely. So projects, for example, they can target gender equality.
Hmm.
So that's a very, I would say, very popular co-benefit
Right.
that companies are looking for. And it's actually projects that empower women, that support women. So a great example of those types of projects are, for example, cook stove projects,
Hmm.
because it's actually helping change the lifestyle, the livelihood
Right.
of women in these local communities.
Yeah, so it's not a one-off project. It's something that is really bringing good to that community for long term.
Exactly, it's really improving the livelihoods.
Nice. And so, yeah, going a little bit backwards in this, for companies who are looking to get started with carbon offsetting or this impact reductions projects, um, how should they start approaching this topic in the first place? What are the first steps that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I mean, I think we at this point we know that this decade is crucial to restore the planet and reverse climate change.
Hmm.
And we know that we have to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees
Right.
to avoid disastrous climate consequences. So this said, we know that we have to focus our efforts on reducing, on decarbonization. And so that is really the priority, right?
Hmm.
Focusing on reduction efforts and decarbonization. However, we know that transition can happen overnight. And so supporting these types of emission reduction projects can also play a role to account, especially for those unavoidable emissions, those residual emissions.
Right.
So, what does this mean in practice for companies? Is first of all, companies need to measure their carbon footprint. They need to understand the sources of emissions and identify emission hotspots.
Mhm.
Once companies understand where the emissions are coming from, they can set emissions reduction targets. These are targets in the short and medium term, and really following, for example, SBTI guidelines.
Yeah.
And then finally, offsetting can come into play once these two steps have been done. So reduction is a priority. However, we can go beyond reduction efforts and accelerate climate action and have positive impacts on the environment and local
Hmm.
communities by supporting these types of projects.
Right.
So I would say there's two first steps that have to be
Hmm.
done before you can actually start supporting these projects.
Yeah, and those are really knowing what the current impact is, so measuring that impact, and also really trying to make steps to reduce the current impact in the real business strategy first, and then
Mhm.
moving to the offsetting or the yeah, how shall we call it?
The climate
Economic
contributions.
contributions, right? Sorry, even I'm confused. So, and then move to the climate contributions.
Yeah, exactly.
If we already touched upon this a little bit, but how do you believe that these types of projects have changed over the last few years?
I think when I first started working at ClimateSeed, a lot of the conversations that we had with clients were really educational, educating them about the benefits of carbon offsetting, because it just wasn't very common and people didn't really understand
Right.
what it was. I think today that has changed a lot. People are a lot more educated on the topic, and so it offsetting, purchasing carbon credits, supporting these projects have become a lot more common,
Yeah.
and we've seen that the market has just increased so much. So in 2021, the market transaction volumes doubled compared to 2020, which is huge. And actually, the market value reached $1 billion,
Wow,
and it's predicted to reach um, around the $50 billion by 2030.
that's a
So
lot.
it's yeah. So it's definitely a growing market. And why is that? I think that first, company stakeholders, so different shareholders, clients, employees, are a lot more sensitive to climate topics,
Right.
and they have really been putting pressure on companies to act against climate change.
Hmm.
And this will continue. And as well, I think increased regulation will also come into play.
Yeah.
So as a result, the number of companies making climate commitments, net zero claims, has increased substantially
Hmm.
and will continue to do
Yeah.
so. And so to meet those claims, companies not only need to measure their emissions, set reduction targets, but they'll also have to account for those residual
Right.
emissions. So as a result of this, the market has just increased so much. And with that, actually also the prices of the carbon credits has increased.
Right. And I think you're completely right. There's so much more interest and traffic in the market, and I think that's a great thing. But there's also a side to it where a lot of also bigger companies, I think, that are some big polluters out there who have given a bit of a bad reputation as well to this carbon offsetting and this theme in general by um, kind of masking it in a way, a bit greenwashing, by purchasing these climate credits, but not actually doing the work. And I think that there's a few things that's caused in terms of people having trust in some of these projects. And for example, I was speaking with a friend earlier, and they were asking me, but are these even, projects where there's an active effort in trying to make the world better, or is it just that somebody was already planting trees, for example, somewhere, and now they're getting paid extra for, the work that they were, for example, already a part of. And I think for me, I think transparency plays a really big role in this. But I'm curious to hear from your side. How do you think? Why do you think, firstly, that this has gotten a bad reputation? What do you think are the main reasons behind this?
Yeah. So yeah, I think the market, as you said, has gotten a bad reputation, unfortunately. And I think the main reason why is because the market is was so fragmented. So a lot of different projects, really all different levels of quality projects. A lot of projects are actually in developing countries. So that also might be a topic related to transparency.
Right.
So I think that in general, as you said, and I agree with that, there has been a real lack of
Right.
transparency in the voluntary carbon market. I think that has changed a lot.
Mhm.
I think that right now the quality of projects has improved
Mhm.
significantly. The work of the standards also has been very
Yeah.
important to actually make sure that these projects are meeting the key criteria of the
Yeah.
standards and are actually, as you mentioned, actually positive.
Right.
I think that has been an issue, this lack of transparency, but it's changed.
Yeah.
I think also, as you were saying, on the company side, there's also been an issue because, as you mentioned, there's also malpractices from large corporations
Hmm.
that have found cheap credits in the market, have decided to maybe not focus so much on the reduction
Yeah.
efforts and kind of just purchase carbon
So they
credits
kind of
and
missed the
actually
first steps.
exactly. And actually, and related to that, even gone beyond that and made climate neutral claims, right? So it's like it's really this on the company side, this lack of transparency
Right.
as well, right? So not following the right steps, not focusing the efforts on reduction targets, on measuring emissions,
Hmm.
on
Yeah.
decarbonization, and then with this idea of really paying to pollute, right?
Hmm.
So I'll purchase carbon credits to account for my emissions, but I won't change any of my
Right.
activities of my ways of doing business.
Hmm.
And I think that as well has changed. And the reason why is because you have all these different stakeholders that are more educated, more sensitive to climate related
Yeah.
topics. And they're questioning these companies,
Mm.
they're questioning companies' claims.
Right.
When a company claims a carbon neutrality, they're saying, um, explain it more to me.
Yeah.
Like, so I think this has changed for the better, of
Yeah.
course. And related to that, so companies' behaviors has changed and as a result of that bad press that they got.
Right. Obviously, it is still, a pretty complex topic in many ways. But I think, like you said, there's more knowledge. You can find more things if you search online and that type of thing. So people are asking the right questions, I think, and therefore,
Mhm.
yeah, they aren't getting away with that. But I know that you guys do things differently at ClimateSeed, and could you maybe elaborate a little bit on, yeah, on how you approach the projects that you work with?
Yes, so Climate Sea was really launched to bring transparency to the voluntary carbon
Yeah.
market and ensure that project contributions maximize the positive impacts to the local communities, to the projects.
Yeah.
So at Climate Seed, we not only see the projects as projects that generate carbon credits, but we look at the projects in, let's say, a more holistic way. So looking at all of the environmental and social benefits related to the
Yeah.
projects. And these are, as I was saying, the co-benefits of the
Yeah.
projects, the different sustainable development goals that they target. And it's something that we do at Climate Seed and is that all of the projects have to pass our strict three-step verification
Hmm.
process. So this means that first of all of the projects are certified, have been certified by a national or international standard.
Okay.
So these are standards such as Gold Standard, VCS Vera, Plan Vivo, Climate Action Reserve, and there's several different
And
standards.
do all impact reduction companies work with these standards? Are these general standards in the market, or?
Yes, so these are the standards that are actually certifying the
Right.
projects. And so the projects have to meet the different criteria
Yeah.
of the standards. And then they're able to actually generate carbon
Okay.
credits. So they have to meet these
Okay.
requirements. I would say the most popular standards, the most well known are Gold Standard and VCS Vera,
Okay.
just because they are the largest
Yeah.
standards. But there's also other standards that, for example, at Climate Seed we work with.
Yes.
And so what this means is that all of the projects that have met their criteria can actually generate carbon
Okay.
credits. So they're actually they're let's say real carbon
Yeah.
credits. Secondly, all of the projects have to pass a strict banking due diligence. So we're checking everything from anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, reputational analysis.
Hmm.
I mean, really doing a strict banking due diligence on the project
Yeah.
developers. And this is to ensure that the money is going to the right hands
Right.
and it's actually going to finance the project,
Right.
which seems pretty basic, but it's important.
Yeah. No, definitely.
And then finally, all of our projects have been validated by our internal sustainability
Hmm.
committee, which is composed of market experts. And what they do is that they review all of the technical, qualitative aspects of the project. And it's once we get their validation that we add the project onto our portfolio.
Right.
So today, what that means is that we have about 35 different projects in our portfolio, in our platform,
Hmm.
in more than 20 countries.
So they have to pass these all three, and if they don't pass it, you don't take them on as a project. Right.
Exactly, exactly. And this is really to ensure high quality projects
Hmm.
and to ensure that that the money is going really to the projects,
Right.
to the local communities as
And
well.
how do you go about finding these projects? Like, how do you actually get started with working with these projects?
Yes. So I think it's a bit of both, right? So we go looking for projects and also projects come looking for us.
Okay.
So I would say that it's a bit of both. Um, right now, we've established a really good network of
Hmm.
project developers. So we're currently working specifically with the current project developers. And now that we have a new shareholder, so now that we're a part of the AXA Impact Fund, we're actually looking as well to invest in the implementation of new projects.
Okay.
So actually looking not just on the sale, let's
Hmm.
say, of the carbon
Yeah.
credits, but also on developing, on implementing new
Oh,
projects.
nice. And so you have a really strict criteria. You don't work with just any project or yeah, something that you don't trust. But what are some red flags that you would say that people should look out for in when they're investing into projects, or if they have a company who is working with a certain project that they can kind of look into that? What would be something like a red flag they should look out for that it's probably not the best project?
Yes. So I think this is really our value add as ClimateSeed,
Hmm.
just because we do such a strict due
Yeah.
diligence on all the projects. So really, all of the projects that we have on our portfolio have passed this due
Yeah.
diligence. It doesn't mean that all of them have all of the projects that we reviewed have passed it.
Yeah.
And so, for example, in one instance, we had a project developer that was actually incorporated in several different tax havens.
Mm.
I believe it was at 6 different ones. And so this financial structure just doesn't make sense for this type of
Yeah.
project. So that for us was a complete red
Right.
flag. In another instance, we had a project that was a great project on paper,
Hmm.
right? And then once our sustainability committee actually started looking at the technical
Yeah.
aspect of the project, um, they actually found that the project was overestimating its baseline
Mm.
because it was usually using a national deforestation rate when the project was actually in a very, very remote area.
Ah.
So that's kind of the red flags that as climate seed we're looking at.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think that kind of it's a little bit similar to when you're measuring your impact for of your product or your supply chain or value chain. We also run into that sometimes at Ecochain that when you're looking at whatever it may be, it's like steel or something. Steel made in the Netherlands is not the same impact as steel made in Finland, for example. Even so, there's differences in terms of where a product is built, and I guess that's a bit the same with this project that looked great on paper, but in the end, you have to be super precise and accurate about all these measurements, or yeah, they're not gonna give you the real impact that you have.
Yes, and I think and that's a lot of the work that the standards do.
Mhm.
As Climate Seed, we go beyond just what the standards check for,
Yeah.
because we know that there's way of cheating
Right.
the let's say the calculations.
Right, right. Yeah, we don't want that. And so, okay, let's say there's a company that, has done all the right steps. They've measured their impact. They've reduced their the emissions that they can reduce. They've come to Climate Seed and have worked on a project. How can they communicate about these projects transparently and constructively? Because as we spoke about, there's sometimes a bit of a lack of transparency, I think. And I think that that's a really important aspect to tackle in terms of gaining that trust back of the public.
Yes, definitely. So I think that, as I mentioned, we really follow the Net Zero initiative
Hmm.
and its recommendations, and we really encourage our clients to do the same. So as I was saying, really kind of moving away from carbon offsetting, from carbon compensation, and focusing on the climate
Yeah.
contributions, just to remove that negative connotation related to compensating for something bad I
Right.
did, and actually focusing on the positive. and focusing on the positive impacts of the projects.
Right.
So as I was saying, the projects have that carbon aspect, but also they have all of the other co-benefits. So for us, it's really important, and a quality project for us is a project that has all of these
Yeah.
co-benefits. So it's focusing on those uh, those positive impacts of the project of protecting, for example, local biodiversity,
Hmm.
supporting local communities, creating jobs, etc.
Yeah.
And so that's on one end. On another one, it's being fully transparent. So as I was saying, and as we were talking about, there's two steps that have to happen before you should actually purchase carbon credits and support these types of projects. And it is related to the measurement
Hmm.
and the reduction efforts.
Yeah.
And so when you're communicating about the climate action that you're doing as a company, it's important to talk about those two first steps.
Right.
It's important to talk about the measurements.
Hmm.
So where are your emissions actually coming from, and what you're doing to reduce those emissions.
Right.
And then, of course, for the residual emissions, it's what projects are you supporting?
Hmm.
Related to that, it's a lot of companies really like to claim, or in the past, I think that has changed a lot, but this claiming climate carbon neutrality.
Yeah.
So, and I think it gets tricky because there's no real definition on what being carbon neutral
Right.
is. So we try to encourage them to move away from that,
Mm.
um, and communicate as transparently as possible to their different stakeholders.
Yeah.
And it's because ultimately the goal is not to be as a company, as a product, um, carbon
Yeah.
neutral, but actually as to reach global carbon neutrality.
Hmm.
That's the end goal.
Right.
So that should be the focus.
Yeah, so kind of moving away from those fluffy words and
Yeah.
telling the story from the beginning till end and incorporating into this climate action also the steps prior.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes we work with companies that really want to talk about carbon neutrality. And if that's the case, then you have to be really, really
Yeah.
transparent. Exactly what have you measured? What are the different scopes that you've
Yeah.
measured? Specifically, it gets tricky with scope three.
Right.
And then and then actually, what emissions are you compensating for?
Yeah.
Is it scope one? Is it scope two? Is it scope three? Is it all of them?
Yeah.
So you really have to be very transparent.
Yeah, right. And I think it's important what you mentioned to keep in mind that the goal isn't, to communicate about these goals. It's about actually achieving those goals.
Fight climate change.
Right, exactly. So I only have one last question, and that would be what other people or organizations or companies inspire you in terms of what they do to make our economy and society more sustainable?
Yes. So actually, I think that it's a really hard question. And I think at the end, I think what really inspires me the most is actually the work that's being done, the work being done by the local communities.
Right.
So it's really through their efforts that we can protect and restore natural carbon sinks. So I think it's we also have to remember, yes, organizations, people, companies, we have a role to play in climate action,
Hmm.
but also these local communities. I mean, they are at the end the ones that are helping us protect these natural carbon sinks that we have,
Right.
and we need to keep on conserving, preserving the existing forests,
Yeah.
such as the Amazon, for example.
Yeah, right. And those people aren't in the media as much as companies or these types of public personas, but they are extremely important, especially in these projects that you guys are involved in.
Yes, definitely. And for example, we're currently working with a mangrove project in Mexico,
Hmm.
and it's actually two communities, and it's an incredible work that they're doing to conserve and restore, and protect the mangroves and all of its biodiversity.
Cool.
And we know that mangroves are really valuable ecosystems, and they actually help sequester 4 times the amount of carbon that a tropical rainforest does. So it's
Interesting.
all this work of the local communities that is really important.
Super interesting. Well, thank you so much, Alessandra. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I also learned a lot about, yeah, the different aspects that go into these projects. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Let's speak soon again. Bye
Yes, bye
bye.
bye.